Every gardener knows the frustration of waiting for compost to mature. You pile up leaves, grass, and kitchen scraps, only to turn the heap months later and still find half-rotten material. For most people, composting takes 6 months to a year before it's truly ready to feed the soil. But the Amish, who have relied on compost to keep their fields productive for centuries, discovered a way to cut that waiting time in half. They aren't buying commercial accelerators or magic powders. Their secret lies in how they build the pile. The ratios, the timing, and the natural additives that wake up the microbes and keep them working faster than a casual backyard pile ever could. In this guide, we'll break down the Amish method step by step, with practical ratios and examples you can apply whether you're working with a backyard pile, a raised bed trench, or a garden corner. By following this approach, you can turn kitchen scraps and farm waste into rich black compost in as little as 10 to 12 weeks, instead of waiting a year. The Amish understand compost as a living fire that needs balance. One reason Amish compost works so quickly is that they see it as something alive, not just a dump for waste. You know, a compost heap is a lot like a fire. It needs fuel, air, and just the right amount of moisture to keep burning. If you toss in too much green material like grass clippings or kitchen waste, the pile can turn slimy real fast. On the other hand, if you use too much dry carbon like straw or corn cobs, the pile just sort of sits there, cold and slow. The Amish have a pretty smart solution for this. They stick to a strict layering pattern, built on the rule of 2 parts brown material to 1 part green material. So what does that look like in practice? Well, for every 2 wheelbarrows of straw, dried leaves, or shredded corn stalks, you add 1 wheelbarrow of fresh grass clippings, manure, or food scraps. The browns, they provide structure and soak up any extra moisture, while the greens bring in the nitrogen that microbes absolutely crave. Keeping this balance is key. It helps prevent all those common problems like foul smells or piles that just never seem to heat up. Now, in practice, you really don't have to measure everything perfectly, but aiming for that 2-to-1 ratio gives you a steady furnace of decomposition. You can start by piling browns on the bottom, greens on top, and then just sprinkle in a handful of soil before you start the next layer. That thin layer of soil? Well, that's the Amish trick most gardeners totally miss. It seeds the compost with living microbes and honestly keeps odors in check. Where most gardeners stop at grass and leaves, the Amish add powerful accelerators. They know that animal manure, when used properly, jump-starts decomposition. A single shovel of fresh cow, horse, or chicken manure added between layers acts like rocket fuel for microbes. The trick is not to overload the pile, which can make it too hot and kill off the very organisms you want working. A good measure is about 1 part manure for every 10 parts of total compost material. But the Amish also use simpler additives you may already have. A sprinkling of wood ash supplies potassium and helps balance acidity. A handful of ground limestone or crushed eggshells buffers the pH and prevents sour anaerobic conditions. Some farmers even splash diluted buttermilk or whey into the pile, feeding bacteria that digest cellulose more quickly. These additives don't replace the greens and browns, they make the whole system run smoother and hotter, cutting months off the normal timeline. The Amish never leave their compost to chance. They check the pile for moisture constantly. Compost should feel like a wrung-out sponge, damp but not dripping. Too much water drowns the microbes and drives out air, leading to rot instead of compost. Too little water and the pile goes dormant, sitting half-finished for months. One Amish method is to water each layer lightly as it's built, especially if the browns are very dry. During summer droughts, they cover piles with burlap or straw mats to hold moisture, while in wet seasons they stack piles under simple lean-to roofs. In your garden you can do the same. If your compost dries out, a watering can with diluted compost tea or even just rainwater is enough to bring it back to life. If it's too wet, add extra straw or shredded cardboard to soak up the excess and let the pile breathe again. Another Amish principle is not just turning compost endlessly, but turning at the right times. The first turn usually happens 2 weeks after building, once the inner pile has heated and begun to cool. At this point, the outer layers that were still raw get mixed into the hot center. From then on, turning every 2 to 3 weeks keeps oxygen available and redistributes material. Each turn reignites the microbial fire, speeding decomposition instead of letting the pile stall. For home gardeners, this can be as simple as moving the pile with a fork from one spot to another or into a second bin. The key is consistency. If you keep adding fresh scraps without ever mixing, the pile stays uneven, with some parts ready and others barely touched. Following the Amish rhythm means the whole batch matures at once, in a predictable timeline of about 10 to 12 weeks. You know, when done correctly, the compost is not just finished faster, it is richer, darker, and more balanced. Amish farmers have this neat trick to test its readiness by squeezing a handful. If it crumbles easily, smells earthy, and no longer has visible scraps, then it's ready for the field. When you spread this compost across garden beds, it not only feeds the crops but also transforms the soil beneath. It improves clay by loosening its texture and strengthens sandy soils by holding water longer. For a raised bed gardener, a 2-inch layer worked into the topsoil is enough to improve fertility for an entire season. In a larger garden plot, a wheelbarrow per 10 square feet is a good application rate. Even in backyard settings, adding finished Amish-style compost every season reduces the need for fertilizers and builds soil that can resist drought and disease. So, to put this into practice, you'll want to start by collecting browns like dry leaves, straw, shredded paper, or even corn stalks. Then, match those with greens such as fresh grass clippings, kitchen scraps, or manure. Build your pile by layering 2 parts browns to 1 part greens and sprinkle a shovel of soil on each layer. Every 3rd or 4th layer, just add a thin scattering of manure, wood ash, or maybe some crushed shells. And keep the moisture in check so it always feels damp but never soggy. After about 2 weeks, go ahead and turn the pile, then repeat every few weeks until it becomes dark and crumbly. If you stick to these ratios and steps, you'll have usable compost in about 12 weeks instead of waiting a whole year. And that's the Amish compost hack in action, simple, balanced, and rooted in centuries of practice. Compost really doesn't have to be a year-long waiting game. The Amish have shown that by respecting the ratios, layering with intention, and adding some simple natural accelerators, gardeners can cut the waiting time in half and end up with richer compost than ever before. Whether you've got a large farm or just a backyard corner, these principles still apply. What truly matters isn't having fancy tools, but keeping a steady rhythm of balance, moisture, and timing. If this guide gave you some practical steps you can use in your own garden, help us keep sharing these old-world secrets with modern gardeners by subscribing to Soil and Plant Doctor and sharing this video with fellow growers. Together, we can keep soil alive, fertile, and thriving for generations to come.